Not too long ago, in fact, last weekend, I attended a grand opening party for an old friend who is a cancer survivor, actually went through a long process and went into remission finally. And one of the things that she had always wanted to do was to open a shop downtown. She'd had one in Northgate, and she always regretted not opening the shop downtown. And so after she went into remission, you know, sometimes people have these, well, I'm going to do that finally. So she opened the shop downtown, and being the good friend that I am, I had flowers delivered for the grand opening event, which I attended last weekend. And so I called up my friend Mark, who owns a florist shop in Seattle. And Mark is somebody who has been an old friend for a long time, and of course I'm obligated to order flowers from him and his florist shop. But Mark has developed some vascular dementia. Now, that's something important to understand, is that there's all forms of dementia. Alzheimer's is certainly the one most of us are most familiar with, but there can be vascular dementia or dementia caused by strokes or ischemic attacks in the brain. So things can happen gradually with dementia and Alzheimer's, or they can happen rapidly. People can lose capacity very quickly because of a stroke or some other type of neurological accident. This is not uncommon. You know, what Phyllis was talking about, Alan, she could see, and he could see these changes over time, but sometimes these changes occur rapidly. So there's different kinds of dementia. Mark's dementia is actually it's sort of plateaued, and it allows him to keep working, but occasionally he slips up a little bit. And I went to this grand opening party last weekend, and I asked my friend Julie, I said, well, I don't see the flowers that I sent for your grand opening. And she said, oh, I think maybe there was some kind of misunderstanding, and here, I'll show you. So she took me behind the receptionist's desk, and there were these dark red gladiolas and a banner that said, rest in peace. Okay, so I've sent a rest in peace flower display to a cancer survivor. So on Monday, I called Mark, and I said, Mark, what's the deal? You know, what happened to my flowers? And he said, oh, well, there were only 2 deliveries last Saturday. There was yours to your friend and one to the funeral. And I said, oh, okay, well, maybe you could send some flowers, to my friend, just, the ones that I sent. And I said, thanks a lot. But what I didn't tell him was that on the card to the one to my friend, it said, good luck in your new location.
Oh, God.
I just didn't have the heart to tell him. So some people at a funeral got flowers. Good luck in your new location. So anyway, a little levity after a heavy story. So I'm here to talk about our Alzheimer's and Dementia Advanced Directive, but I want to talk a little more broadly about just advanced planning before I get into specifics around advanced planning for Alzheimer's and dementia. So all of us are going to die. We all understand that if we're competent people. And we all can either prepare to die, or we can be passive about the process and let other people make decisions about how we die. So if you haven't taken the time to think about how you want to die, or document your wishes using advanced directives, and that's a broad term for a living will, which most of us understand, and a durable power of attorney for health care, which names somebody we call a healthcare agent to make decisions for you. If you haven't done that, or you haven't talked to your family members about what it is that you would want or not want, then you're approaching your end of life in a passive way. Now, choosing not to do something is a decision, right? Mm-hmm. So you can choose to be passive and allow other people to make your choices for you. And if you're lucky, maybe those choices will be the choices that you want, or the medical providers that are treating you will make the decisions or recommendations that you would want them to make. Or if you're unlucky, things can go south, and you can end up having a very prolonged, painful, dying process, and you can leave your loved ones wondering whether they did the right thing or not, never having closure that comes from knowing that you honored someone's wishes. So there are many downsides to making the decision to not do something, to be passive about it. And so advanced planning is really about being proactive. It's about saying, this is inevitable. This is as much a part of life as birth, as all the other things, the great events in our life, marriage, the birth of our child, our first grandchild, all these important things. It's acknowledging this important part of life, one of the life's great transitions. And so taking the time to document your wishes is really important. And if you're somebody who has strong beliefs about how you want to die, what treatments you want or don't want, or when you want them or you don't want them, then I strongly encourage you to use Compassion and Choices of Washington's Advanced Directive. And the reason is because that document allows you to make very specific and clear when you do and don't want treatment and what treatments you do and do not want. Mm-hmm. And that's very important. It's very important. So I encourage you to do advanced planning. The packet that you have, there's no need to pull out and look at anything right now, but the packet that you have includes our directive. Many of you may have already consulted with an estate planning attorney and had your and made an advanced directive, a living will and a durable power of attorney for healthcare. Chances are the durable power of attorney for healthcare is fine. It names somebody that you trust to speak for you if you can't speak for yourself. But chances are very good that the living will that the attorney provided for you is not so good. Because most estate planning attorneys in Washington use a document that's included in the Natural Death Act, and it uses very vague language. And it also even includes a provision that was sort of pushed into the document about pregnancy invalidating the document. So if you see a statement in your living will that says, if I am pregnant, my wishes as expressed in this document shall be ignored, your directive is the Natural Death Act document, and it's not good enough. So I would suggest that you replace that document with our advanced directive. If you like the durable power of attorney for healthcare that you already have, all you have to do is cross out that section of our directive, which combines a living will and a durable power of attorney for healthcare. So it's important to document your wishes, but more importantly, it's important to communicate your wishes. One of the most important aspects of filling out advanced directives, including the Dementia and Alzheimer's Advanced Directive, is that you take the time to sit down with your physician, your family, your chaplain, your loved ones, anybody who's going to be playing a role at the end of life for you, to express your wishes, to show them a copy of your document and say, Read this. Do you understand everything here? Do you agree to honor my wishes? If you don't agree, will you at least be loyally opposed? By loyally opposed, I mean, I don't agree with it, but I'm not going to interfere. So it's important that communication around what you want and don't want is almost as important as making the document itself. Because when conflicts occur in families around the end of life, the problem is that, let's say you have a family of 4 kids. You've got 3 of them that are totally on board with you and your choices. But the 4th one doesn't agree, doesn't want that ventilator stopped. The medical provider will not remove the ventilator because of that one person that might file a lawsuit. Liability, the fear of liability, really drives a lot of what happens in this country, and medical care is no exception. And so, if you can, have that family meeting and get people together and have them all together when you talk about your directive and your end-of-life choices. And just say, do you all understand? Do you all agree to honor my choices? And then, later on, if somebody goes AWOL on you or goes rogue and says, look, I don't agree with that, then the other siblings and the other people who are there can say, hey, wait a minute. You were right there when Mom said, do you have any problem with this? And that peer pressure from siblings can often bring that person back in line. Now, sometimes if you have a child, bless his or her heart, that you just don't see eye to eye with for whatever reason. Let's say your religious beliefs are antithetical to your child. You are, let's say, a Unitarian. And your child is a born-again evangelical who believes that where there's life, there's hope, even if that life is a persistent vegetative state. You might want to actually write in your directive, I love my daughter, but we have never seen eye to eye on my end-of-life choices. And if she objects to the choices that I make in this document, her wishes are to be ignored. And that's hard. But sometimes those are the things that you have to do to ensure that one person can't throw a wrench into the works. So let me move from there on to talking about the actual Alzheimer's and Dementia Mental Health Advanced Directive. So first, let me tell you what it isn't. It isn't a living will or a durable power of attorney for health care. We all need those documents. Every adult needs those documents. Now, many of you are my age or older, and we've lived long enough, to know that people die. Young people have a different perspective on things. I did when I was 18 or 19 years old. I didn't think about the end of life or dying. But the 3 highest profile right-to-die cases in this country were all young women without advanced directives. Terry Schiavo, Nancy Cruzan, and Karen Quinlan. All young women. So your children, who are adults, all need advanced directives. So we all need that living will and that durable power of attorney for health care. And of the 2, the durable power of attorney for health care, naming someone to make your choices for you is the more important of the 2 documents. But if you're someone who comes from a family that has a history of Alzheimer's, or you are someone who's been diagnosed with early onset or early stage Alzheimer's or a form of dementia, but you're still mentally competent, then the Alzheimer's and Dementia Advanced Directive was designed for you, and I'm the co-author of that document. And the other is Lisa Brodoff, a law professor at Seattle University. The directive is based on a mental health directive that was passed into law in Washington, I think, in 2002. It was actually designed for people with episodic mental illness, people who would lose capacity and then regain capacity, sort of like, have a manic episode or a schizophrenic episode or go off their meds. And it allowed those people to say, okay, when I'm not competent, this is what I want. It's okay to involuntarily commit me. It's okay to make sure that I take my medication. So that's the reason, that's how the Mental Health Advanced Directive came into law in Washington State. But Lisa Brodoff had the great idea of saying, well, why couldn't this directive be adapted for people who become demented and then stay demented because of Alzheimer's disease, for instance? And she wrote a journal article in an elder law journal that was this thick when I printed it out, about using a mental health directive for the purpose of documenting your wishes if you become demented or get Alzheimer's disease. It took me about a year to get through that because I was busy with other things. But then I contacted Lisa and I said, Lisa, we have to make this directive available to people. And Lisa and I worked for about a year to make this directive available. And what this directive does is it doesn't address end-of-life issues. It addresses issues like who you want to provide your care, where you want to live, when you should stop driving. And it really gets into thorny issues like, do you want your marital vows to be honored? What happens if your spouse becomes so demented that he or she doesn't recognize you anymore? Does that person expect you to remain monogamous? These are things that people have to think about when they're married to or the primary caregiver of someone with Alzheimer's disease. Driving. When do you stop driving? That's hard enough for people who are mentally competent. My mother at 80 had an accident. She couldn't remember what happened. She stopped driving that day. That was the defining moment for her. She realized that she should stop driving. But in our culture, especially here on the peninsula, where you can't hop on light rail or use the subway, taking someone's keys away, think about it. Think about the loss of independence that represents. And so for somebody whose capacity is starting to lose capacity, well, that person can say, okay, here's when I want to stop driving, and it's okay to take my keys away from me or take the distributor cap off the car and make sure it won't start anymore. So it goes into things like that, but one of the most important things that it does is talk about how to finance your care. Now, only a fraction of people will choose to do what Alan did, voluntarily stop eating and drinking. Most people who develop Alzheimer's will slowly lose their capacity, and the day will come when they're simply no longer competent. But nobody knows when that will happen. And so most people sort of slip into incapacity. It's sort of the natural process of Alzheimer's, which is a terminal illness. It takes a long time to die from Alzheimer's, but it is a terminal illness. And so most people slip into incapacity. And so having all of these things addressed in a document is really a gift to your family. And one of the most important things that need to be addressed is how to finance that care. Because our culture, our society, is not providing for long-term care. It's not covered by Medicaid, or Medicare, I should say. Or, it's not, not everyone has a long-term care policy that will cover the care. Have you ever heard of a Medicaid divorce? Because when one person in a couple needs the care and it has to be paid for, it's the couple's combined income that determines eligibility. And to be eligible for Medicaid, which will pay for the care, for this long-term care, you have to essentially be pauperized. You can keep your home, I think, a car, but you can have almost no assets. It's called the spend down. And that is a euphemism for making somebody poor, the spend down, making you poor. And that's how you qualify for Medicaid in this country. So really understanding how to finance the care necessary, the skilled nursing, the care provided by a good facility, a memory care facility for somebody, that's something that has to be looked at in advance, not at the time of a crisis. It has to be planned for. It's one of the most complicated aspects of the directive, and it's complicated enough that we recommend to people that they actually consult with an elder law attorney to talk about, well, how do we finance our care? How do we protect our assets so that my wife or my husband isn't going to be financially ruined by the care that I need? And this is something that really needs to be planned for. It's a form of financial planning. There's a good document in the packet that you have, and it's titled "Maintaining Dignity and at the End of Life with Alzheimer's Disease," or something like that. And it kind of summarizes a lot of what I've said today. Even if you don't, make the Advanced Directive yourself or have a reason to, I would encourage you to read that document because it talks about just sort of how to protect your end-of-life choices and the choices that you have if you're dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia. They're very different than when people have cancer or heart disease that result in a prognosis, or a generally kind of a well-understood prognosis. A physician can say, okay, we think you have about a year or 6 months to live. It doesn't work that way so much with Alzheimer's and dementia. It's very hard to predict. Sometimes people with Alzheimer's can be completely demented and as healthy as a horse and go on year after year. So they may not have an opportunity to decline treatment and be allowed to have a natural death. And so they may go on and on. So I would suggest you take a look at that. There's also the last page of the instructions of both the Advanced Directive instructions and the Alzheimer's Directive instructions are really good things to take a look at to make sure that you've addressed those issues for yourself. Whether they apply to all advanced directives and all advanced planning, not just our document, but any advanced planning document you make. It gives you good tips, like, for instance, how many of you are keeping copies of your Advanced Directive in the glove box of your vehicles? Yeah, a couple people here. If you keep them in the glove box of your vehicles and in your favorite suitcase,
Right.
and you just tell your family members and your healthcare agent, you can always find my documents in the glove box of my vehicle or in my suitcase, they will always know where they are. So that's just one of the tips that's in the document that you can look at. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the next speaker and answer your questions later on. Thank you.